But there's going to be frustrations in your work because of the curse of sin. So we don't work to live. But there are also a lot of people who live only to work. Work is how they find their self-fulfillment. Work is the source and meaning of life for them. And you can certainly understand how, if you were created to work, you can certainly see how that would become a perversion for you. And it's equally dangerous. In order to avoid its dangers, we must transform the goal of work. In our work to live mentality, the goal is always self-fulfillment, right? I want to have the achievement of creating something, of building something, of doing something that people notice and say, wow, look at what they built. Look at what they did with all of the skills and talents that they have. But Paul's understanding in this passage is that work is all about service and stewardship of your gifts, not to please yourself, not to get glory for yourself, but to please God. Paul says in verse 7, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that what good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he's a bondservant or he's free. Doesn't make any difference. The statement says that when you work well and your good work is to honor God and not yourself, you're actually doing the will of God. You aren't seeking the praise of men in that. And so for the Christian, this is the new goal of your work. Paul is saying, honor God. And the way to honor God is to do a great job, to have pride in your work, and to do it all with a great attitude. That's what Paul is basically saying. That's honor, by the way. It's a great definition of honor. Doing a great job with a great attitude. You can use that as a basis for how you teach your kids or grandkids to honor their parents. Do a great job with a great attitude. What's interesting is that we have this temptation of laziness and this temptation to overwork, both sides of the pendulum swing. And both of those ultimately stem from a lack of love of God. They stem from a desire not to honor God, but to honor ourselves. If you're saying work is a necessary evil, you're saying that God is a cosmic killjoy. He can't be trusted to have your best interests at heart. Work is proof of that. But if you're finding your worth in your work, you're saying God isn't enough. God won't be enough. And I'd rather prove myself with this, my work, instead. And I'd rather have that than his grace. Paul says, no. You don't work to find self-fulfillment. You don't work to find pleasure. The only worthy work is work that is honoring Christ. So when you have that attitude that your work is to honor Christ, you're not in charge of the reward that you might receive. This is the principle that Jesus tells us and his followers in Matthew chapter 6. When you pray, you must not be like hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, and they love to be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they've already received their reward. If you are using your reward, and it's an earthly reward, guess what you've got already? Your reward. There's nothing more coming. And when we apply that principle, and we understand that all of our work is done for the glory of God, the quality of our work is going to go up, number one, because we're going to see God as the one that's going to judge the standard of it. But not only that, but your reward that you get later is going to be vastly superior than the one that you were paid here on earth. And now I don't know what that will be. I couldn't possibly put a price tag on it and what that reward would be. But I can guarantee you that my imagination and your imagination is too limited to perceive it. There's an old maxim out there, you've probably heard it. If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I think that needs a little amending, just a slight tweak if I can. If you love what you do and you're doing it to honor Christ, then you'll never work a day in your life. Meaning it will never feel like meaningless toil, even though toil is going to crop up in the midst of it. You'll understand that overcoming that toil, overcoming the thorns that crop up in your life, are going to serve to honor Christ even more in your life. But if you're working in its drudgery, even though you're working to honor Christ in it, well, maybe it's just simply because you haven't listened to the call of God on your life. Now, we often think that calling has to do with a pastorate. I'm called to work as a pastor. No, calling is whatever God has called you to do in your work. You could be a gardener. He did that with Adam, he may be aware. So whatever calling, he's giving you talents and skills, and he's given you a passion for certain things. And those are the things that are part of your calling. Listen to those things. Do the kinds of things that encourage those gifts and talents and skills and all of the things that God has blessed you with. You see, I think that everyone is called to some kind of work. Everyone. You'll only find that work light when you're doing what God has called you to do and you're doing it to honor him. That's when the work becomes light and fun to do. And honestly, I can't give you a definition of what that is for you. I'm always amazed whenever I encounter people that are doing work that I would never imagine doing. And they enjoy it. Maybe you've seen, Mike Rowe's Dirty Jobs, right? These guys are doing these horrific, in my estimation, jobs. And they're loving it. And I think, how can they love doing that? How can they take pride in their work when they're doing that? I would never be called to that. You're looking at me going, yeah, we think the same thing about you, Pastor. I agree. I don't know why I'm a pastor. But I can't, the only time, honestly, Pastor Appreciation Month, I had no idea that was happening, by the way. Let me tell you, just to let you in a little insight. The only times that I find this job to be drudgery for me is when I find myself doing it for me. Isn't that interesting? When I have my heart right before God, this job is so easy. And you're like, of course it is. You only do it on Sunday. That's not true. But there's a calling in your life. He's called you to something. And no matter how high that job may be in the eyes of the world or how low, when you're doing what he's called you into doing, you love doing it. When you take your eyes off of the reward that you're getting for it, and you say, it doesn't matter whether or not I end up wealthy. It just matters whether or not I'm serving God in this. And the quality of the work that I can give is going to be better than the quality that anybody else gives. Guess what? God is honored by that. He's pleased by that. How is it possible, as Paul instructs, for a slave to get through a day? Paul says, the only way that a slave is going to get through the day is to look at the master and say, I'm not working for you. I'm working for my God in heaven. And my ultimate reward comes from him, not from you. And so therefore, because I have a Father in heaven who loves me, who sacrificed his own son for me, I know that I'm going to get a reward when I serve him and honor him and glorify him in my work. And so therefore, I'm going to do the best job that I can. And you're going to love me, but I didn't do this for you. But here's the last thing that I'll say on this. I'm way over time, as usual. You have to be a Christian to do this. That's not a superior standpoint. I'm not saying, oh, look at us, we're so great, we can do this. No, you have to have an understanding of the miserable nature of your own life before Christ in order to understand what he's done for you. Unless God is the meaning of your life, which is what it is to be a Christian, when Christ comes in, God becomes the meaning of your life. And unless he's the only one that you're living for, which is another definition of Christianity, well, then all of the leisure money and all the self-fulfillment and all the self-actualization that you want for yourself isn't going to matter. To quote Ted Turner, it's all an empty bag. The common denominator of whether or not you're going to do a good job and be happy doing it, regardless if you're a slave or you're a freedman, is if you're honoring God in it. And if you don't know God, you're never going to realize the pleasure of good work. Not really. Because you'll always be wondering, why didn't I get more for what I did? Or you'll always be cutting corners and you'll be depressed because you know you put out a poor product. You must be living for God, and the only way that you can do that is if you truly trust him and give your life over to him.